Despite the shocking and tragic fact that since Donald Trump became president, there have been 4 fatal plane crashes resulting in the deaths of at least 85 people, the Trump administration continues to relentlessly purge personnel from the Federal Aviation Administration, including, reportedly, safety workers. But before we unpack all that, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bells before you go. All right, friends, the Trump administration's lethal incompetence continues to manifest itself, and I suppose we shouldn't be surprised given his terrible mismanagement of COVID. It happened on his watch. He had a responsibility to manage it appropriately. He didn't. He lied. He refused to use the bully pulpit to rally Republican leaders, and it resulted in more than 1 million deaths. That was Trump term 1. Here we see the lethal incompetence of Trump within the first 4 weeks in a variety of ways, but again, 4 major plane crashes resulting in the deaths of 85 people, and Trump is continuing to purge the FAA despite the fact that, based on all reports, the FAA is critically overworked and understaffed. Make it make sense. Trump administration firing FAA staff, including safety workers, despite recent crashes. Trump has begun firing hundreds of employees at the Federal Aviation Administration, including some who maintain critical air traffic control infrastructure, despite 4 deadly crashes since Inauguration Day. According to the Professional Aviation Safety Specialists PASS Union, several hundred workers received termination notices on Friday. Many of the workers were probationary employees, those employed for less than a year and lacking job protections, which makes them low-hanging fruit for the Trump administration's streamlining efforts. According to the U.S. Office of Personnel Management, there are about 200,000 probationary employees within the federal government. The firings at the FAA do not include air traffic controllers, but did appear to include engineers and technicians. A spokesman for the union said non-probationary technicians had been fired, citing of a figure of less than 300 roles so far. The positions terminated include maintenance mechanics, aeronautical information specialists, environmental protection specialists, aviation safety assistants, and management administration personnel. This is a really disturbing notion. It really is. It doesn't just have to be purging air traffic controllers, again, especially when the FAA collectively is overworked and understaffed. That means these responsibilities will be added to people whose responsibilities are already burdensome. The cup already runneth over, and now you're pouring more water into it because you have fewer cups by your own choice. Rachel Maddow puts a lot of things in context in terms of the recent crashes. Again, just think about this. The last 4 weeks have been a blur for so many of us. It's hard to keep track of everything, all the incompetence and the danger, rather, I should say, of the Trump administration, and it's hard to keep track of all this. So here's Rachel Maddow reminding everybody about, unfortunately, the spate of fatal crashes and major crashes that we've seen since Trump took over.
But I also have to note, and I kind of can't believe this, but for the 5th time since Donald Trump was sworn in just 4 weeks ago, we are also tonight watching developments in yet another plane crash. This time it's a Delta Connections flight that originated in Minneapolis. It crashed on landing at Toronto Pearson International.
And I should say it's the 5th major crash, but there were no fatalities in this most recent crash. That's why I said 4 fatal, and she's talking about 5 major crashes.
Airport. The flight was carrying 80 people. 18 have been injured. Some of them have been hospitalized. The FAA commissioner had taken action against Elon Musk's SpaceX company. Musk demanded his resignation. He resigned on Inauguration Day. Trump didn't bother appointing a replacement to run the FAA until after the first plane crash of this presidency, the midair collision over the Potomac River in Washington that killed 67 people. That was soon followed by another deadly plane crash in Northeast Philadelphia, which killed people both on the plane and on the ground. That was soon followed by another deadly plane crash in Alaska. In between, we had a plane crash into a tug on the ground at Chicago O'Hare, critically injuring an airport worker. We had a flight catch fire on the tarmac at Houston. Passengers had to evacuate not just down the stairs, but down the slides. We had 2 planes smash into each other on the ground at SeaTac. We had a small jet careen off the end of a runway into another small jet last week in Arizona. 4 people injured in that crash, 1 person killed. And now we have had this new crash of the Minneapolis to Toronto flight with the plane now upside down on the runway. There have been 5 plane crashes in the United States, or flights originating in the United States, since Donald Trump started this second term as president 4 weeks ago.
And I should note that first fatal plane crash was the first in 15 years. None under Biden. The first time in 15 years under Trump, and now it's back to back to back fatal crashes. And in the midst of all this, the current Secretary of Transportation, Sean Duffy, a former Fox News host, he's been doing everything in his power to shirk responsibility. Remember, first, Trump and Duffy blamed DEI. It's DEI's wokeness, suggesting that unqualified personnel were given critical air traffic control positions, people with targeted disabilities. And then we learned that that program, which permitted people with targeted disabilities to work at the FAA and get air traffic control positions, began under Trump. No evidence, by the way, that people with targeted disabilities who received the proper training were unqualified for the job. But he tried to scapegoat people with targeted disabilities. And then to add to his bigotry, you have the additional humiliation of, well, if that's the case, you were the one who began the damn program. So no matter how this ends up, the arrows end exactly at the same place, which is that you, Donald Trump, are responsible. Not Joe Biden, not the Democrats, you and you alone in your administration. Didn't work out well for Trump and Duffy. So now they're trying to blame former Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg. Again, as Axios has noted, the Trump administration's push to make large-scale reductions in the federal workforce in a cost-cutting drive has been criticized by some, including the union that represents the FAA and Duffy's Democratic predecessor, Pete Buttigieg. Duffy's comments on X were in response to Buttigieg's criticism. And so, again, they went back and forth over this. The flying public needs answers. How many FAA personnel were just fired? What positions? And why? So Sean Duffy responds with this. Mayor Pete failed for 4 years to address the air traffic controller shortage and upgrade our outdated World War II era air traffic control system. In less than 4 weeks, we've already begun the process. Well, in 4 weeks, here's what's interesting. You blame it on Buttigieg, but under Buttigieg, there were no fatal plane crashes. And under you, there have been multiple. And remember what Republican logic was. Anything that happens on a Democrat's watch is that Democrat's responsibility. The buck stops there. You're in power. It's your job to fix, be it pandemics, be it inflation, be it grocery prices, be it terrorist attacks, whatever. It's on your watch. You're responsible for it. Well, that logic cuts both ways, no matter how much MAGA desperately wants you to not believe it's true. And my advice to MAGA, when people get salty, oh, it's only been 4 weeks. You can't blame them. No, I can. And I'll smile doing it because it's what you did to Biden and Democrats. And this cuts both ways, and I'm happy to use it against you. I don't mind doing it. If you have a problem with that, you should adjust your standards too. Because the truth is, when there were fatalities of any sort, of the Biden administration, of any sort, be it Lakeith Riley, the woman who was murdered by an undocumented immigrant, be it the 13 U.S. troops who died in Kabul in Afghanistan, destroyed in a ISIS-K terrorist attack as we were evacuating Kabul. All of that was blamed on Joe Biden. That was the right wing's logic. Joe Biden is personally responsible for it. He is morally culpable, and he should suffer a political consequence. That logic, again, cuts both ways. Donald Trump is president. He is responsible for the FAA and by way of Secretary Duffy. And Duffy shouldn't be firing people. Duffy should be hiring more people. And if Duffy eventually fires people, that's his prerogative. But the wise thing to do would be to not do it right now when the FAA is, by all accounts, overworked and understaffed. And it's hard to get people to be hired there, especially on the heels of back-to-back-to-back-to-back fatal plane crashes. If you're going to reduce the size of government, maybe do it a little later. Maybe not do it right now when your actions may contribute even more to fatal plane crashes. Maybe that's what a responsible person would do. And I should say, for the record, you should check out people. I mean, since Pete left office, man, he's dialing up the sass, as well he should. He's been responding back and forth, flying back and forth, calling the Trump administration out, as well he should. Because, again, that's the standard they created. These deaths occurred on the Trump administration's watch. And as Brian Rosenwald responded to Aaron Rupar about this, he put it very succinctly. He goes, and also, for better or worse, this isn't how it works. You can't blame the other guys for stuff once you get into power. You own everything. Is it fair? Of course not. But that's politics. Where I would disagree is that under the standards set by Republicans, it is fair. Now, in a very rational world, we would say, okay, listen, simply because a thing occurs on your watch, maybe we should be a bit more nuanced when it comes to assigning blame. I would support that, Republican or Democrat. But that's not the Republican standard for Democrats, so why should the Democrats have any different standard for Republicans? Why shouldn't Democrats be sounding the alarm about this and using it to score political points? We've seen that Republicans do it when the shoe's on the other foot. Republicans are banking, they're begging, please don't hold us to the standard we hold everybody else to. I'm different from a lot of other liberal commentators because I say, hell no. I will gleefully hold you to the same standard that you try to impose on everybody else because I know you can't live up to your own standard. And that makes you uniquely pathetic. That makes you uniquely dishonest and uniquely hypocritical. And it brings me joy to rub that in your face. If you don't like that standard, then what you should do, what Sean Duffy should do, what other prominent Republicans should do, is publicly say, you know what? Now that we're responsible for governing and we're feeling the heat, we need a more nuanced understanding of blame and accountability. And we apologize as Republicans for relentlessly creating an environment where blame and accountability are just partisan tools. Anything bad that ever happened, if your mom got cancer on Barack Obama's watch, it was somehow Barack Obama's responsibility. If inflation, global inflation, that's Joe Biden's fault. We contributed to that. We as Republicans contributed to that, and it was wrong. And we know it's wrong because now we feel it on the other side and we don't like it. You want to do that? Then I'm happy, as just one liberal commentator, to say, okay, let's shake hands and have a more nuanced understanding of blame. But that's not the world we live in. That's not the world that Republicans created. And on top of that, they are deliberately taking steps which will make things less safe. Again, I'm not advocating for you. I'm not saying that, that again, they can't fire people. They're not that they can't streamline the government, that they can't try to make bloated departments less bloated. But there's no evidence that the FAA is bloated. The evidence indicates that the FAA is emaciated. You should be surging qualified people to the FAA. And if you have any aspirations about purging it or firing people, that should probably wait until long after you get the number of fatal plane crashes under ruthless control, which you have not. Stupid. They should accrue a political consequence for this. We should relentlessly call it out. And again, to anybody who complains about it, I'm sorry. This is the standard that Republicans created, and I am more than happy to use that against them, and so should you be. In the meantime, let me know what you think in the comments.